His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. The coffee cup shattered on the pavement, a dark stain spreading like blood in the pale glow of the parking lot light. "You don't know who you're messing with," he hissed, his eyes burning with something colder than anger. "She's not for you. The air in Nebraska hangs different than anywhere else. It's heavy, like a wet blanket, full of the smell of corn and soil and the kind of deep, abiding loneliness that seeps right into your bones." I was rolling east on I-80, chasing a sunrise that was still a few hours away, my Freightliner Cascadia humming a familiar tune. The dash lights cast a low green glow on my hands, steady on the wheel. 20 years of this, and 2 million miles, and the rhythm of the road is more a part of me than my own heartbeat. It's a constant, a low thrumming vibration that travels up through the seat, through my spine, and settles somewhere deep in my chest. It's the only lullaby that works anymore. Pulled off at an exit that promised 24 HREATS and fuel, the kind of sign that's a lighthouse for guys like me. The truck stop was called the Beacon, which felt a little on the nose. Its neon sign was flickering, the B and the N having given up the ghost years ago, so it just said Eco. Looked about right. The place felt tired, like it had seen too many sunrises and heard too many sad stories. It had the same weary sag as 100 other stops from Cheyenne to Knoxville. You see enough of them, they all start to blur into one long, continuous building that stretches across the whole damn country, a place you can walk into in Wyoming and walk out of in Georgia without ever noticing the difference. I parked the rig out in the back 40, where the big dogs sleep, the rumble of the diesel engine dying with a final shudder that shook the whole cab. For a minute, I just sat there in the silence, listening to the almost inaudible hum of the reefer unit on the trailer behind me, keeping 40,000 pounds of chicken wings at a perfect, frozen 0 degrees. Funny, the things you haul. One week it's chicken wings, the next it's computer parts or lumber or a million rolls of toilet paper. You're moving the guts of the country, the stuff people need and the stuff they just want, but you're completely disconnected from it all. Just a name on a bill of lading. Could have slept right there in the cab. I do that more often than not these days. A motel room feels too big, too empty, the silence too loud. The bed is always too soft or too hard, the pillows smell like cheap detergent and 1,000 other lonely heads. The cab, it's small, yeah, but it's mine. It fits. Everything I own in the world is within arm's reach, my logbook, a dog-eared paperback, the thermos, the folded picture of a woman from Montana tucked into the sun visor. There's a comfort in that smallness. It's a shell I can pull into. But the coffee in my thermos tasted like burnt asphalt, and my stomach was starting to complain in a way that suggested it was about to file a formal grievance. So, I swung myself down, my boots hitting the gravel with a crunch that echoed in the pre-dawn quiet. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of diesel and damp earth and something sweet, like cut hay. I stretched my back, heard it pop in a few places that only pop after 10 hours in the saddle. 2 million miles takes a toll. You feel it in your joints, in the permanent crick in your neck, in the way you look at the world through a dirty windshield even when you're standing still. You start to see life in terms of exits and mile markers. The diner was attached to the gas station, a long, low building that probably hadn't been updated since the 80s. Inside, it was a perfect museum of the American road. Red vinyl booths with cracks patched up with silver duct tape, the clatter of heavy cutlery on thick plates, and the smell of old grease and fresh coffee fighting for dominance. The coffee was winning, thank God. A couple of other drivers were hunched over their plates at the counter, staring into the middle distance like they were trying to see the end of their run. You could see the exhaustion etched on their faces. The road map of fine lines around their eyes. A family with 2 sleeping kids was crammed into a booth by the window, the dad's face illuminated by the pale, cold glow of his phone, the mom staring out into the darkness of the parking lot. They looked like they'd been driving forever and still had forever to go. I took a booth in the back corner, the one with the best view of the whole room and the door. Old habit. You learn to watch your back in this line of work. Not because you're expecting a shootout at the OK Corral, but because the road attracts people who are running from something, and sometimes that something comes looking for them. You see things. You learn who to trust, and that list gets shorter every year. You learn to read a room the second you walk into it, to feel the currents of tension or ease that flow between people. Then she came over. She wasn't a movie star. She wasn't one of those impossibly beautiful women you sometimes see working a stop in Vegas or LA, the ones who look like they took a wrong turn on their way to a casting call and are just killing time until their agent calls. This woman was real. Maybe 30, 35. Hair the color of straw, pulled back in a messy ponytail, with little wisps escaping to frame a face that was pretty, but tired. Deeply tired. You could see it in the faint lines around her eyes the color of a stormy sky just before the rain hits. She had a smudge of what looked like flour on her cheek, and her apron wasn't as clean as it should have been. She moved with a kind of weary grace, gliding between tables like she was conserving every ounce of energy she had left. "Coffee?" she asked. Her voice was low, a little rough, like she'd smoked a few too many cigarettes or done a little too much crying in her life. Maybe both. It was the kind of voice that held stories, most of them probably not very happy. "Please," I said. "Black. As dark as my prospects. And a menu, if you don't mind." She didn't smile at my weak attempt at humor, just gave a short, professional nod that told me she'd heard every bad joke from every lonely man who'd ever sat in this booth. She moved away with an efficiency that told me she'd been doing this a long time. I watched her go. The way she moved, it was all business, but there was something else there. A fragility. Like a bird with a broken wing, still trying to fly, still going through the motions because it's all it knows how to do. She stopped at the counter to grab a pot of coffee, and for a second, she leaned against it, her eyes closed, a deep sigh escaping her. It was a private moment, one I wasn't supposed to see, a crack in the professional armor. She came back with a thick ceramic mug and a laminated menu sticky to the touch. She filled the mug from a glass pot, her hand steady, but I noticed a faint tremor when she set it down on the table. Our fingers brushed for just a second as I reached for the mug. It was like a tiny jolt of static electricity on a dry day, a spark of connection that was gone as quickly as it came. Her eyes, those stormy gray eyes, met mine for just a fraction of a second longer than they should have. And in that look, I saw a whole world of trouble. It was a look I recognized. A silent, desperate plea hidden behind a mask of indifference. It was the same look I saw on a girl in a bus station in El Paso once, a kid no older than 20, running from a man who thought he owned her. She had a bruise blooming on her cheekbone, the color of a faded plum. She was trying to hide it with her hair. She was counting out loose change at the ticket counter, a few dollars short for a bus to anywhere north. I didn't say a word, just walked up behind her, put $100 bill on the counter and said to the clerk, "Put her on the next bus to Denver. And get her a coffee." The girl started to cry, silent tears tracking through the dust on her face. I just nodded and walked away. A week later, I was in a dingy bar in Amarillo, minding my own business, when a big guy with the boyfriend's name, Javier, tattooed on his neck in fancy script sat down next to me. He'd been asking around. "You the trucker from the El Paso station?" he asked. His voice calm, which is always more dangerous than yelling. The conversation ended with him swinging a beer bottle and me swinging back. I left with a split lip and this thin white scar that runs along my jaw. He left with a lot more. Some lessons you learn the hard way. And the first lesson is that getting involved always costs you something. "Know what you want?" she asked, her voice still flat, professional, pulling me back to the greasy diner in Nebraska. "Steak and eggs," I said, shaking off the memory. "Medium rare. Hash browns crispy." "Sure." She scribbled it down on her little green pad, her pen digging into the paper like she was trying to carve the words into the table. As she worked the room, refilling coffee for the other drivers, I couldn't stop watching her. There was a guy behind the pass-through to the kitchen, a big fellow with a greasy apron and a scowl that looked like it had been carved into his face. He watched her too. Every move she made. His eyes followed her from table to table, a look of grim possession on his face. He'd bark an order, "Table 4 needs a wipe." And she'd flinch, just a little, a barely perceptible tightening of her shoulders, before heading back to the kitchen. Brother? Husband? Boss? didn't matter. The air between them was thick with something ugly and coiled. I've seen men like him all over this country. Men who think love is about ownership, that a woman is a piece of property to be managed. My ex-wife, Karen, her father was like that. He wasn't a violent man, not physically, but he had this idea that his family was his portfolio. He'd talk about Karen like she was a new truck he'd just bought. "She's a good girl," he'd say, slapping me on the back at our wedding. "Run smooth, just keep her maintained." It used to make my skin crawl. Maybe that's why Karen and I never worked. She was so used to being someone's possession, she didn't know how to just be someone's partner. After the divorce in 2014, I heard she married a banker who managed her whole life, right down to her social calendar. I hope she's happy. I really do. But I doubt it. Freedom is a hard thing to live without once you've tasted it, and I don't think she ever even got a sip. Looking at this waitress, I saw the same cage, just built with different bars. The food came. It was decent. The steak was cooked right, the eggs were runny, the hash browns were crispy enough. Diner food has its own kind of honesty. It's not trying to be fancy. It just is what it is. I ate slowly, nursing my coffee, watching the diner empty out as the pre-dawn lull set in. The family with the sleeping kids left, then one of the drivers from the counter paid up and headed out, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor. Soon, it was just me, one other driver still staring into his mug like it held the answers to the universe, and her. And the guy in the kitchen, a shadow watching from the wings. She came over to refill my coffee, moving with less urgency now that the room was quiet. "Everything okay with the meal?" she asked, her voice softer now, less brittle. "It's great," I said, and I meant it. "Best I've had this side of the Mississippi." A tiny smile touched her lips. It was like a flicker of light in a dark room. It transformed her face. For a second, the weariness was gone, and I saw the girl she must have been before the world put its weight on her shoulders. "You're a long way from home," she said, nodding toward my rig in the lot. "Home is wherever I park it," I said. It's a line I've used 1,000 times, a shield against pity or questions I don't want to answer. But tonight, it felt particularly hollow, like a lie I was telling myself. "I know what that's like," she said, her eyes drifting to the highway outside, a ribbon of darkness stretching to forever. "Feeling like you're always just passing through." We stood there in silence for a moment. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence you can only share with someone who gets it, who understands the profound, crushing loneliness of a transient life. It was the silence of two ships passing in the night, close enough to see the lights on in the other's cabin and wonder about the person inside. "You need anything else?" she finally asked, her professional mask slipping back into place, breaking the spell. "Just the check," I said. She nodded and went to the register. The guy from the kitchen, the one she called Dale, came out, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. He was big up close, with a thick neck and hands like cinder blocks. He said something to her, too low for me to hear, his voice a low rumble. She just nodded, not looking at him, her focus entirely on the cash register. He gave me a long, hard stare before disappearing back into the kitchen. The message was clear. A warning. Don't get any ideas. You're just passing through. Remember that. She came back with the check, but she didn't just put it on the table. She held it in her hand for a second, her knuckles white. She slid it across the table, face down, like a card player sliding an ace. "Have a safe drive," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes pleaded with me. A desperate, silent scream. I picked it up. Underneath the bill, folded into a tiny, tight square, was a piece of receipt paper. My fingers felt it there, a secret lump. I waited until she was back at the counter, her back to me, pretending to wipe it down, before I unfolded it under the table. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. It wasn't a check. It was her name, Sarah, and a phone number. And underneath that, 2 words scribbled in frantic, hurried letters. "Help me." My heart hammered against my ribs. A simple steak and egg stop had just turned into something else entirely. Something dangerous. My first instinct, the one honed by 20 years of self-preservation and minding my own damn business, was to ball it up, leave cash on the table for my meal, and get the hell out of Nebraska. Forget I ever saw her. Forget the look in her stormy eyes. Forget the whole thing. Trouble finds you easy enough on the road, you don't have to go looking for it. But I couldn't. Because it reminded me of my friend, Jimmy. My best friend. He disappeared 10 years ago on a run through Arizona. Just vanished. His rig was found on the side of I-40, wiped clean, not a fingerprint to be found. No signs of a struggle, no Jimmy. Before he left on that last trip, he'd called me, his voice buzzing with a weird energy, a mix of excitement and nerves. "I'm in it now, Sam," he'd said. "I'm really in it." He'd gotten mixed up with a woman, a cocktail waitress in Flagstaff who was in some kind of trouble. Said her ex was a bad dude, wouldn't leave her alone. Said he was going to help her get to California, start fresh. I told him to be careful. Told him not to be a hero. He just laughed that big, booming laugh of his. "What's the point of having a white knight complex if you never get to save anybody," he'd said. "Besides, she's got eyes that could make a man forget his own name." I never heard from him again. They found his truck, but not him. It was like he just evaporated into the desert heat. The cops asked me questions, but I didn't have any answers. I just had the memory of his voice, and a sick feeling in my stomach that never really went away. For years, every time I drove through Arizona, I'd scan the faces in the diners and the truck stops, hoping to see him, weathered and older, with a story to tell. But he was just gone. I stared at the number in my hand. What was I supposed to do? Walk away and spend the rest of my life wondering if I'd left her to the same fate as Jimmy? Or walk toward the trouble and risk becoming another ghost on the highway? I stood up, slid a $50 bill under my coffee mug, and walked to the door. "Keep the change," I said to her as I passed the counter. Her eyes widened, a flicker of shock and maybe hope. As I walked out into the damp, cool air, I could feel the eyes of the man in the kitchen burning a hole in my back. I got back in my cab, the door sealing me into my own little world with a pneumatic hiss. The folded piece of paper felt heavy in my pocket, like a stone. I started the engine, the familiar rumble a comforting sound. I could just pull out onto the interstate. Disappear into the darkness. She'd be just another story I'd tell myself on a long night. Another face that haunts the empty miles. Another what if. My life was full of them. I looked at the diner. The eco sign flickered, a dying pulse. I thought of her tired eyes. I thought of Jimmy's laugh. I thought of Clara, the woman in the picture in my visor, and how I'd walked away from her because staying felt too complicated. I'd chosen the easy road then, and I'd regretted it every day since. Maybe it was time to choose the hard one. Damn it. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button. My whole body was screaming at me to just drive. But I couldn't. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times, each one stretching into an eternity, then she picked up. "Hello." Her voice was tight with fear, barely a whisper. "It's the trucker," I said. "From the diner. You okay?" A shaky breath on the other end. I can't talk. He's here. My brother, Dale." So he was her brother. That explained the possessiveness, but not the fear. Not that kind of deep, animal fear. That was reserved for something worse than a grumpy sibling. "Where can you talk?" I asked, keeping my voice low and calm, the way you talk to a spooked horse. "I don't know, he watches me all the time. He takes my paychecks. He reads my mail. I can't breathe." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I heard a muffled sob. She was trying to cry without making a sound. This was bad. Worse than I thought. This wasn't just a controlling brother. This was a prison built of cheap vinyl and fluorescent lights. "Listen to me, Sarah," I said, my voice firm, trying to give her an anchor. "Is there a place you can get to? Away from him. Even for 10 minutes. A long pause. I could hear the faint sound of clattering dishes in the background, Dale starting to clean up. "There's a rest area," she said finally, her voice rushed. "About 10 miles east of here. On 80. It's usually empty this time of night. I can tell him I'm going to the all-night pharmacy in the next town for my allergy medicine. He lets me do that. He thinks I'm sick." "Okay," I said. 10 miles east. I'll be there. Big green freightliner. You can't miss it. How long will it take you?" 20 minutes, she whispered. "Please be there." "I'll be there." I hung up and put the truck in gear. My mind was racing. This was a stupid, stupid idea. It had all the makings of a classic setup. Girl in distress, lonely trucker, secluded meeting spot. Next thing you know, I'm waking up in a ditch with a knot on my head, no wallet, and no truck. It's a story as old as the interstate system itself. A cautionary tale told by old-timers to scare the rookies. But the fear in her voice, that wasn't fake. I've heard actors on TV try to sound scared. They never get it right. They never capture that hollow, brittle edge of someone who has truly run out of hope. Sarah had it. It was the same sound a deer makes when it's caught in the headlights, just before the impact. I pulled out onto the highway, my headlights cutting a clean path through the inky blackness. The 10 miles passed in what felt like 10 seconds. I saw the blue sign for the rest area and pulled off, parking in the far corner of the truck section, under a flickering sodium lamp that cast long, distorted shadows. The place was deserted except for one other rig, a flatbed, its driver asleep, the curtains drawn. I killed the engine and waited. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant whoosh of a car passing on the interstate. I checked my mirrors. I watched the entrance ramp. My hand rested on the tire iron I keep wedged next to my seat. Not much of a weapon, but it's heavy and it's steel, and sometimes that's all you need to change the tone of a conversation. After what felt like an eternity, a beat-up old sedan, a Toyota Corolla from the 90s with a mismatched front fender, pulled into the car section. It sat there for a minute, engine running, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Then the lights cut out. The driver's side door opened and Sarah got out. She looked small and frail in the sickly orange light. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. She looked around, her head on a swivel, saw my rig. And started walking towards me, her steps quick and nervous. I got out of the cab and met her halfway, on the cracked asphalt that separated the cars from the trucks. The wind was picking up, whipping her hair around her face. Up close, the fear was written all over her face. Her eyes were wide, darting around as if she expected her brother to jump out from behind a trash can. She was shivering, though the night air wasn't cold. "He bought it?" I asked. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "He thinks I'm at the Walgreens. He told me to get his brand of cigarettes. I don't have much time." "All right," I said, trying to project a calm I absolutely did not feel. "Talk to me. What's going on? What do you need?" The story came tumbling out of her in a frantic, whispered rush. Dale was her older brother. Their parents had died in a car wreck on a slick road in Kansas a few years back, leaving them with nothing but debt and each other. They'd drifted, working odd jobs, until they landed here, in the middle of nowhere. At first, he was just protective, still reeling from the loss. But it got worse. He started seeing threats everywhere. Every man who looked at her was a predator. Every dollar she earned was a dollar he needed to manage, for their future. He'd convinced himself that the world was out to get her, and he was her only savior. "He's not a bad person," she insisted, tears welling in her stormy eyes and tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. "He's just broken. Since Mom and Dad, he thinks he has to be my father, my keeper. But I'm suffocating. I haven't had a friend or gone on a date in 3 years. I'm 32 years old, Sam, and I feel like I'm 100. I'm a ghost in my own life." She looked at me, her gaze desperate, latching onto me like a drowning person to a piece of driftwood. I saw you tonight. The way you looked at the road. You're free. I want to be free. I have a cousin in Oregon. Portland. She said I can stay with her. If I could just get there. I have a little money saved up he doesn't know about. Not much. A few $100s hidden in a book. But I need a ride. I need to get out of Nebraska. Tonight. My gut was churning. A ride. That's what Jimmy's girl had wanted. A ride to California. This felt too familiar. It felt like a story I'd already heard the ending to. Sarah, I said, my voice gentle but firm. This is a big deal. You're asking me to help you run away from your family. Your brother could call the cops, report you missing. Report my truck as a kidnapping. That's a world of trouble I can't afford. My whole life is tied up in that rig. He won't, she said, shaking her head so hard her ponytail whipped around. He won't. He's too proud. And he's too scared of the authorities. He doesn't trust anyone. He won't call them. He'll just come looking for me himself. That was somehow worse. A grieving, paranoid, overprotective brother hunting his sister across state lines, with my truck as the target. This had trouble written all over it in big, bold letters. I thought about the picture I keep tucked in my sun visor, the edges soft from years of handling. A woman with a smile that could light up a Montana sky, her hair blowing in the wind. Her name was Clara. I met her years ago, hauling cattle feed up to Billings. We had a summer. A perfect, beautiful summer where the road didn't call to me. For the first time in my life, I felt settled. When it was time for me to leave, for my next run, she asked me to stay. Begged me. Stay, Sam. Just stay. We can make this work. She had a life there, a small ranch she'd inherited. I had the road. I couldn't give it up. I told myself it was freedom I was choosing, but it was fear. Fear of staying put. Fear of what happens when the wheels stop turning. Leaving her was the stupidest, most cowardly thing I've ever done. I look at that picture sometimes and wonder what my life would be if I'd made a different choice. If I'd chosen to help someone build a life instead of just hauling cargo from one end of the country to the other. Okay, I heard myself say, the word coming out before I could stop it. Okay. I'm heading west. My drop is in Salt Lake City. It's not all the way to Oregon, but I can get you a good chunk of the way there. You can get a bus from Salt Lake. It's a major hub. The relief that washed over her face was so powerful it almost knocked me back. It was like watching the sun break through the clouds after a week of rain. Really, she breathed, the word full of disbelief and dawning hope. You'll do it? Go back, I said, my voice all business now, my mind clicking into logistics mode. Act normal. Finish your shift. Pack a small bag, just the essentials. Cash, ID, whatever you can't live without. I'll be back at the truck stop at 4 a.m. parked in the same spot, out back. Just get in the passenger side. Don't look at me, don't say anything to anybody. We just, go. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now, but these were different tears. They weren't tears of despair. Thank you, she whispered. Oh God, thank you. She impulsively threw her arms around me, a quick, desperate hug. She was trembling, and she smelled like diner coffee and cheap soap and fear. Then she pulled back, turned, and practically ran to her car. I watched her drive away, her single working taillight disappearing onto the interstate. I stood there in the empty, silent rest area, the weight of what I'd just agreed to settling on me like a winter coat. I was officially involved. No going back. I got back to the truck stop and backed into my spot. I tried to catch a couple hours of sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every bad scenario played out in my head. Dale finding out, coming after us with a shotgun. The cops pulling me over for a routine inspection and finding a runaway woman in my cab. Her turning on me, this all being some elaborate scam to get my wallet and my rig. My brain was a movie theater playing nothing but disaster films. At 3:45 a.m., I was wide awake, drinking lukewarm coffee and watching the diner through my side mirror. The shift change was happening. The morning crew was shuffling in, yawning, and the night crew was shuffling out, looking beat. I saw Sarah leave, walking quickly toward the employee parking area behind the building. My pulse quickened. A few minutes later, Dale came out the back door. He stood there for a moment, a hulking silhouette against the harsh fluorescent light spilling from the doorway, and scanned the lot. His eyes lingered on my truck. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition key. He couldn't know. Not yet. He just stood there, watching the trucks, then turned and went back inside. A chill went down my spine. He was suspicious. He was watching. My heart was pounding a drum solo against my ribs. At exactly 4 a.m., I saw her. A small figure moving through the deep shadows between the rows of sleeping trucks. She was carrying a backpack. She moved fast, her head down, a ghost slipping through a graveyard of steel. She got to my truck, pulled the passenger door open without hesitating, and climbed inside, pulling the door shut with a soft, final click. She didn't say a word. She was pale and trembling, clutching her backpack in her lap like it was the only thing holding her together. "You okay?" I asked softly. She just gave a tight, jerky nod, staring straight ahead through the windshield as if she could will the truck to move. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm my nerves. "Let's ride." I put the truck in gear and slowly, quietly, pulled out of the lot. I didn't turn my headlights on all the way until we were on the ramp for I-80 West. As we merged into the light pre-dawn traffic, I glanced in my side mirror. The Geeko sign of the diner grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another flickering light in the vast darkness behind us. We'd done it. We were out. For the first hour, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic hiss of the tires on the asphalt. The sky began to lighten in the east, a bruised purple giving way to a soft, hopeful gray. Sarah seemed to relax a little with every mile we put between us and that town. The tension in her shoulders eased. She finally let out a long, shuddering breath that sounded like it had been holding for years. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice raspy. "I'm really out." "You are," I said. "How you feeling?" "Scared," she admitted, turning to look at me for the first time. "And, lighter. Like I've been holding my breath for my entire life and I can finally let it out." She gave me a real, genuine smile, the kind I'd seen a flicker of in the diner. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." "It's Sam," I told her. "Thank you, Sam," she repeated, the name sounding foreign and intimate in the small space of the cab. You're a good man." "I'm just a guy with a truck, heading west," I said. But I appreciated the sentiment. It had been a long time since anyone had called me a good man, and even longer since I believed it. We drove through the sunrise. Nebraska flattened out into a sea of gold and green under a vast, open sky that made you feel small and insignificant in the best possible way. We started talking. She told me her story again, the one about her parents, but this time with more detail. She described the icy road, the way the police report said her father had tried to correct the spin. She described the funeral, how Dale had been a rock for her, how he promised to always take care of her. The details made it feel real, solid. She talked about her dream of being a schoolteacher in Oregon, of having a small garden, a quiet life. It was a simple, beautiful dream, and I found myself wanting it for her. To keep the conversation balanced, I told her a little about my life on the road. Not the dark parts. Not about Jimmy, or the ache of my divorce from Karen, or the brother I don't speak to. Just the simple stuff. The places I'd seen, the time I got snowed in for 3 days in a pass in the Rockies and shared my rations with a stray dog who ended up riding with me all the way to Denver. The bizarre things people pay to have hauled across the country, a giant fiberglass dinosaur, a collection of antique cuckoo clocks that all went off at the same time somewhere in the middle of Utah. I kept it light. I was building a rapport, a fragile trust between two strangers thrown together by circumstance. For a few hours, it felt nice. It felt like I wasn't just hauling 40,000 pounds of frozen chicken, but a person with hopes and dreams. It had been a long, long time since I'd had someone in my passenger seat for more than a few miles. The loneliness of the road is a funny thing. You get used to it. You make friends with the silence. But you never forget what it's like to share it with someone. And for a little while, sharing it with Sarah felt right. It felt like maybe I was finally doing something that mattered more than a delivery schedule. We were a few hours into Wyoming, the landscape starting to ripple and rise into the brown, rugged foothills of the Rockies, when my phone, mounted on the dash, rang. It was an unknown number. My stomach tightened into a cold knot. "Don't answer it," Sarah said, her voice sharp with a sudden return of fear. "It's probably just a dispatcher with a route change," I said, trying to sound casual, trying to reassure both of us. But we both knew it wasn't. Dispatchers don't call from unknown numbers. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the screen lit up with a text message. I read it out loud without thinking. "I know she's with you. Pull over. Now." Sarah saw the message and she let out a small, terrified gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's him. Dale. How did he get your number?" "He must have seen me call you from the diner lot," I said, my mind racing, the pieces clicking into place with sickening speed. "He was watching from the back door. He saw my truck." I checked my mirrors, my blood running cold. There was a dark-colored pickup truck, a Ford F-150, maybe a quarter-mile back, keeping a perfect, steady pace. It had been there for a while, maybe the last hour, but I'd assumed it was just another traveler. Wyoming is full of pickups. But this one hadn't passed, hadn't fallen back. It was shadowing us. He'd been hunting us the whole time. "He's going to kill you," she whispered, her face ashen, the color draining out of it. "He's going to kill us both." "He's not going to kill anybody," I said. My voice harder than I intended, the adrenaline starting to pump. "This ends. Right now. I wasn't going to be run off the road by this guy. I wasn't going to let him turn this into something worse." I saw a sign for a scenic overlook ahead. A plan, half-formed and dangerous, bloomed in my mind. Better to face this head-on, out in the open, than on a dark road somewhere. I flicked my turn signal on and geared down, the engine braking with a loud roar. I pulled the big rig off the highway and into the gravel lot. The overlook was deserted, just a couple of sun-bleached picnic tables and a stunning, indifferent view of the valley below. The pickup truck followed me in without hesitation, parking about 20 feet away, blocking the only exit. Dale got out. He looked even bigger in the bright Wyoming daylight. His face was a mask of pure fury. "Get out of the truck, Sarah," he yelled, his voice raw and carried on the high plains wind. "Stay here," I told her, my hand already on the door handle. "Lock the door behind me. Do not get out. No matter what." I swung myself down from the cab, landing heavy on the gravel. I left the tire iron. This wasn't that kind of fight. This was something else. I walked slowly towards him, my hands open and visible, trying to de-escalate a situation that was already at a full boil. "This doesn't have to be a problem, Dale," I said, my voice calm and even. "She's a grown woman. She can make her own choices." "You don't know anything," he snarled, taking a step toward me. He was vibrating with a rage that was almost palpable. "You're just another lonely trucker looking for a quick lay. You think you're saving her? You're going to get her killed." "That's enough," I said, planting my feet. "Whatever problems you two have, you're not going to solve them by running me off the road." That's when he lunged. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. He was surprisingly strong, a wiry, desperate strength. He tried to twist my arm, but 20 years of wrestling with tarps and landing gear gives a man a certain kind of functional strength. I held my ground. "You don't know who you're messing with," he hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of stale coffee and desperation. His eyes were burning, but with something colder than anger. It was fear. Pure, uncut terror. She's not for you. He shoved me back hard. I stumbled, and in the process, knocked over a styrofoam cup of coffee I'd brought out of the cab with me. It hit the ground and the lid popped off, the dark liquid soaking into the pale gravel like a spreading stain. From inside the cab, Sarah screamed my name. But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at Dale. And in that moment, seeing the sheer, animal panic in his eyes, I realized this wasn't what I thought it was. This wasn't about a brother trying to control his sister. This was about something else entirely. She told you about our parents, right? He said, his voice dropping, cracking with a sudden, shocking vulnerability. The car wreck? Yeah, I said, watching him carefully, my mind trying to catch up. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. There was no car wreck, you idiot. Our parents are alive and well, playing golf in a retirement community in Florida. They disowned us. Both of us. Years ago. The ground seemed to shift under my feet. The first twist. The entire foundation of her story, the thing that had made me pity her and want to help her, was a complete lie. The icy road, the funeral, all of it. A fairy tale she'd spun to get what she wanted. What are you talking about? I said, though I was afraid I already knew. Ask her, he spat, pointing a trembling finger at the cab where Sarah was now hidden from view. Go on, ask your damsel in distress what really happened in Tucson 3 years ago. Ask her about a man named Ricardo. Ask her why we had to change our names and bury ourselves in the middle of nowhere. He was breathing hard, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a raw, gaping despair. I'm not her jailer, he whispered, his voice breaking, the sound swallowed by the wind. I'm her witness protection. The only one she's got. And you just drove a goddamn billboard down the interstate. Pointing right at her. My blood ran cold. Ricardo. Tucson. The name rang a bell, a faint, ugly chime from a past conversation. A story I'd heard from another driver a few years back, swapping lies and truths over coffee in a greasy spoon just like the one I'd left. A nasty piece of work out of Arizona. Cartel adjacent. The kind of man who made people disappear. The kind of man who might have made my friend Jimmy disappear in Flagstaff, just a couple hours up the road from Tucson. The same world, the same kind of trouble. The same kind of dark gravity that pulls people under. I turned and looked at the cab. At Sarah, her face pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her expression wasn't one of a rescued princess. It was the face of a cornered animal. She wasn't running from a broken brother. She was running from a past that was far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. And Dale wasn't her captor. He was her last line of defense, a flawed, terrified man doing the only thing he knew how to do to keep them both alive. I walked back to the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel, the sound unnaturally loud. I opened the door. Sarah was sobbing, her whole body shaking, her backpack clutched to her chest. Is it true? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth it had held just an hour before. She wouldn't look at me. She just nodded, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving. The second twist. The one that recontextualizes everything and makes you feel like the biggest fool in the world. The real story came out, piece by painful piece, with Dale filling in the gaps Sarah was too ashamed to speak. She had been Ricardo's girlfriend. She was young, naive, and liked the money, the excitement, the power that came with being on his arm. She thought she was in love. But she saw things. Terrible things she tried to ignore. One night, a deal went bad. There was a meeting at a warehouse, an argument over a missing shipment. A man ended up dead. An associate of Ricardo's. And Sarah was the only person in the room who wasn't on Ricardo's payroll. The only witness who could tie him to the murder. She ran. Told Dale everything. They packed what they could in her old Corolla and just drove, changing their names, paying in cash, finally ending up in that miserable diner in Nebraska, hoping they were invisible enough to be forgotten. Dale's controlling behavior wasn't about her. It was about... I saw a distorted reflection of it. Okay, I said, the decision forming in my mind, heavy and final. Okay. Here's what's going to happen. I looked at Sarah, still huddled in the passenger seat. You're not coming with me. It's too dangerous. If Ricardo's people are looking, they'll be looking for a truck now. They'll be looking for me. I turned to Dale, who was watching me with wary, exhausted eyes. And you can't go back to Nebraska. That life is over. You were right. I blew it. Your cover is gone. I walked back to my cab, popped open a small, hidden compartment behind the passenger seat where I keep my emergency stash. It's not much. A few $1,000s in cash for when a rig breaks down in the middle of nowhere or you need to grease a palm to get a load moving on time. I pulled it out. It was a thick wad of 20s and 100s, held together by a rubber band. I walked back and pushed it into Dale's hand. He looked at it, then at me, his face a mask of confusion. It's about $4,000, I said. It's not life-changing money. But it's a start. You sell her car for cash today, in the next town. You take this. You buy 2 bus tickets. To somewhere random. Not Oregon, I said, looking pointedly at Sarah. Not anywhere you've ever mentioned to anyone. Get on a bus heading south. You get off a stop or 2 early, in some town you've never heard of, and you find another bus heading east. You become ghosts. You start over. Again. I looked straight at Dale. And you stop being her warden. You start being her brother. You're all each other has. If you keep treating her like a prisoner, you'll lose her for good, and Ricardo won't have to lift a finger. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in forever. A guy named Mac, a retired state trooper down in New Mexico. A guy who still had contacts, who knew how to listen to the whispers on the wind. I didn't give him names. I didn't give him specifics. I just asked him a question. Mac, it's Sam McCarty. Got a hypothetical for you. Remember those stories about that fella down in Tucson a few years back? The one they called Ricardo? Just wondering if his name's still poison on the wind, or if the wind stopped blowing. Mac was quiet for a second. Sam. Long time. That's a name from a ghost story. Last I heard, Ricardo's organization got fractured. Infighting. He's still around, but he's not the boogeyman he used to be. Got his own problems now. Why you asking? Just heard a ghost story myself, I said. Thanks, Mac. I hung up. It wasn't a guarantee of safety. But it was something. I gave Dale the trooper's number on a scrap of paper. Wait a month, I told him. Let the dust settle. Then call this guy. Tell him you're a friend of Sam's. He might know something. He might not. But it's a chance. It's more than you had this morning. Sarah finally got out of the truck. She stood next to her brother. For the first time, they looked like a team, 2 small, battered figures against a vast landscape, united by a shared, terrible secret. I'm sorry, Sam, she said, her voice small, stripped of all its earlier manipulations. I lied to you. I was so scared. I know, I said. People do desperate things when they're scared. I get it. I got back in my cab. I didn't look at them again. I didn't want to see their faces, didn't want to cement them any further into my memory. I started the engine, pulled around Dale's pickup, and got back on I-80 West. I drove for hours, the sun climbing higher in the Wyoming sky. The cab felt bigger than it had before. Emptier. The silence was heavier. I was $4,000 poorer, and I had another story I could never tell anyone. Another secret to haul along with the frozen chicken and the ghosts of the road. I thought about them, standing in that gravel lot, a wad of cash and a phone number their only map. Maybe they'd make it. Maybe they wouldn't.